Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of our 2022 Animal Law Week, which is the eighth annual Animal Law Week we've held here at Harvard Law School. Today's speaker is Piper Hoffman. She is the Senior Director of Legal Advocacy at Animal Outlook and is an Adjunct Professor of Animal Law at NYU School of Law. She's going to be speaking to us today about lawyering for farmed animals. A quick reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A function of Zoom. And I will triage those and ask those of Piper at the end of the talk. So Piper is a 1999 graduate of Harvard Law School, and she's had a great career practicing animal law and teaching animal law. And I won't go into too much detail in her introduction because she will be speaking quite a bit about that during her talk. One anecdote I'd like to share, because she's a little bit humble. Many years ago, we ran into each other on the street in New York City over in Brooklyn, and I asked what she'd been up to, and she was still practicing animal law. I was like, well, no, I'm doing a bit of employment law lately. I'm like, oh, that's cool. What sort of stuff? It's like, well, I just kind of did this discrimination case against one of the investment banks. I'm like the Morgan Stanley case? She's like, yeah. I'm like, you mean the $45 million judgment that's on the front page of every single newspaper in New York City? She's like, yeah, that was my case. It was the first time a major Wall Street firm had paid out a significant sum in a gender discrimination case. So that gives you an idea of how humble Piper is about her work, but hopefully she will not be that humble in describing it to us today. One last thing I need to mention is when Piper was a student here in the late 90s, she was one of the students responsible for petitioning and agitating the law school administration to offer Harvard's first ever animal law course, which was taught by Steve Wise in 2000. I actually returned to Harvard Law School after a 6-year leave of absence, specifically on the basis of that course being offered to take it. And so I can honestly say that I would not be here and might not even be in this career if it wasn't for Piper Hoffman. So please join me in welcoming her back to HLS. Thank you.
Fantastic introduction. I also want to thank the Brooks McCormick Jr. Animal Law and Policy Program of Harvard Law School. It gives me such great pleasure to say that, and you will soon hear why. And thanks also to the Animal Law Society. I am the Senior Director of Legal Advocacy at Animal Outlook. I'll be telling you a bit more about Animal Outlook as we go. And I'm also a Harvard Law School alum, class of 1999. So Chris Green had asked me to talk with you about what I do as a lawyer for farmed animals, and also how I got here from a Harvard Law student, as many of you are, to a career in animal law. So in a nutshell, here's me. I decided to go to law school because I wanted to practice public interest law. And Harvard was not the obvious choice for public interest law back then, but I went anyway because it's Harvard. And after law school, I did a clerkship, which I recommend for anyone interested in the litigation side of animal law. And I have lived in New York City for the last 20 years. So the long game, I use that to describe both some of my work during law school, as well as the entire field of animal law. And for those of us who practice law on behalf of farmed animals in particular, it's a very long game. We lose a lot before we win a little. And if you don't have that long view in mind, you get discouraged very quickly. So when I was a Harvard Law student, the long game I was playing was trying to get the law school to teach animal law. At the time, few schools offered animal law. It was considered pretty fringe, and I wanted to take it, but Harvard didn't have it. So when I started law school, I found my community of vegans who, without them, it would have been very hard for me to transition from vegetarian to vegan. In 1996, there were not a lot of products targeted to vegans, not a lot of information out there. So having those other students was crucial. And with them, I found them in what was then called the Student Animal Legal Defense Fund. I think it's a lot like the Animal Law Society that you have today. So those of us in that organization worked on getting Harvard to offer an animal law class. And if you've ever heard this quote, which I've seen attributed to a lot of different people, it goes, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And that pretty much describes my experience trying to get Harvard Law School to add animal law to the curriculum. First, definitely ignored us. Then we had a faculty advisor, and he reported back to us on how our proposal went before the faculty meeting each year, because the faculty had to vote to approve animal law before the school would start teaching it. So my first year, he said that the reaction was just resounding laughter. And my second year, it was some laughter, but also they had all kinds of requests, like they wanted a proposed syllabus. And that, from students who were still in law school and had never taken animal law. They also wanted names of potential professors to teach the class at Harvard as adjuncts or visiting professors or something along those lines. I think that the faculty reactions were partly just that's how people react to new justice movements, and partly academic snobbery, because animal law was new, it was not widespread, and anything with animals is just a joke. So I graduated, and the next year, I think the next semester, the school announced that they would be offering animal law. So that felt a little personal. They announced it as soon as I couldn't take it anymore. It probably wasn't. But I soon learned how useful it was that I was involved in this fight at Harvard in particular. It's the H-bomb effect. When Harvard Law School announced that it would be offering an animal law class, the New York Times ran a story about it. I don't think it did that when previous law schools had started teaching the class, but in any case, it was the New York Times. And I believe that Bob Barker saw that article and eventually wound up donating $1 million to the law school to teach animal law. And that then wound up snowballing, and he donated a lot of money to several law schools to teach and develop animal law. And I don't think that would have happened if Harvard hadn't decided to offer the class and the New York Times hadn't covered it. So for those of you who are law students at top schools, take advantage of those names, those big names, as long as you can. So that's how I got to becoming a lawyer. And then after my clerkship, I went into animal law as my full-time day job. I worked at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, which was also where I worked the summer between my 2L and 3L years. And there were some exciting cases going on at that time. The ALDF versus Glickman series that eventually established standing for a plaintiff under the Animal Welfare Act complaining about the treatment of animals at a roadside zoo. That was happening at that time. So it was really interesting and educational. I then moved to New York City, and there weren't day jobs in New York City doing animal law. The organizations weren't in New York at that time. But one of the first things I did when I moved to New York was to join the New York City Bar Association Animal Law Committee. And I'm so glad that I did, because for one thing, I kept a foot in animal law. I was aware of new developments, and I worked on a lot of different issues. That particular bar committee is very active. They write comments and submit them, and hold talks and presentations, and generally are very involved. Also, I met amazing people, and that led to other opportunities, including Our Hen House, which you may be familiar with as a podcast. It started out as a website, and I was a columnist on the website, which was great fun and another way to stay up in touch with and current on animal law. I also started teaching animal law at Brooklyn Law School, and I currently teach animal law at NYU Law School. So before I found my animal law day job in New York, for a while, I was at a private public interest firm. And as Chris alluded to, I handled discrimination cases and wage and hour cases, excuse me. So I represented employees in a broad range of individual litigation, class actions, negotiations, and I learned a lot. I also made connections that are valuable to me today. So on the whole, it was a great experience. And now I'm at Animal Outlook. So our mission, part of it, is working today to build a better tomorrow for all animals by exposing truth, delivering justice, revolutionizing food systems, and inspiring change. Animal Outlook is a national organization advocating for farmed animals. We used to be known as Compassion Over Killing. So if you're familiar with that name, it's the same group, and they've been around for 25 years. So to translate the slogans in the mission, we are strategically challenging the status quo of animal agribusiness through undercover investigations, legal advocacy, that's where I come in, corporate and food system reform, and empowering everyone to choose vegan. So those last two, you might look at those as addressing both the demand side and the supply side of the animal product market. The corporations, the food system, the restaurants, the businesses that make a profit by selling animal products to other people to eat. That's the supply side. And we work on reforming the supply side in several ways. One is through litigation. Another is through undercover investigations of their facilities. The more focused supply side intervention in their product and their business is that we sometimes work with companies or mount PR campaigns addressing specific companies, asking them to offer more plant-based products. And that's important for a few reasons. One is that the more plant-based products there are, the more plant-based food people are likely to eat. So, for example, Tyson now has a line of plant-based products. I think it's called Raised and Rooted. So Tyson's products are going to be placed in different stores and marketed to different audiences than the products of a small vegan mission-based company. Tyson is huge, it's mainstream, and its products may reach more widely. So it's great to get plant-based products coming from as many different companies as possible. Another way that that's an important supply side intervention is that the more that animal product companies, animal agriculture suppliers, the more that they also profit off of plant-based food, the less they will have to fight for their existence. If we can get to a tipping point where maybe plant-based food is more popular than animal products, for example, companies that their whole business is selling steak and beef products, for them, that's an existential fight, and they will give it their all. For companies that also have a plant-based product line, customer base, profit source, they are better positioned to transition more into that part of their business. Not that they aren't going to fight to keep animal products, they absolutely will. It's a way of tilting the balance a little more in our favor. So that's the supply side work. The demand side work is empowering everyone to choose vegan. The more people demand plant-based products, the more plant-based products companies will make. And that, therefore, we do a lot of outreach, trying to educate people and to support them when they are thinking about either becoming vegan or eating more plant-based products. We do that in a few ways. One is a website called tryveg.com, and that offers a lot of information, educational material, recipes, and support for people who want to become vegan. We also sponsor Veg Week, and it starts on April 18th, 2022 this year. It's a week-long event where we invite people to pledge to be vegan for a week. And we have prizes and events and coupons and recipes and all kinds of stuff to help people not just support them through their week of veganism, but make it fun. Show them that being vegan is a great lifestyle. And it's not as hard as it may seem from the outside. So I'm the Senior Director of Legal Advocacy, and what the heck does that mean? The first thing that it means, for those of you who are still students in particular, is that everything about a new job may be negotiable. So I know that when I was starting out, I would look at a job description and think that it was set in stone. The title of the job was the title I would have if I were hired. The job responsibilities were exactly as listed in the job description, as was the salary. What I've learned since then, not just in my own professional career, but also representing a lot of other employees, is that most of those things are negotiable. So Senior Director of Legal Advocacy is was not the original title. It does, though, represent what I actually do better. So that's the first thing about the title, is just remember to negotiate. Next, what does it actually mean? What is my role? So the delivering justice piece of Animal Outlook's mission, I oversee that, and it includes a broad range of legal advocacy. It includes a lot of litigation, but not just litigation. We also do a lot of work with regulatory agencies and administrative law. And we seek enforcement of anti-cruelty statutes, for example, and civil statutes as well. Say we do an undercover investigation, and when we look at the results, we see violations of the law. We will then go to the law enforcement officials with our evidence and say, here's what happened, please prosecute. I also oversee communications that are related to the law. So if Animal Outlook is drawing up a petition to send to a mayor to change a law, or writing a press release about a case we're working on, I will review everything to make sure that that all of the statements about the law are right, and that essentially there's nothing misleading. Impact lawyering day to day. Yeah, Chris asked me to describe a typical week in my position, and I came up with a long list of stuff. I might do all of this in a week, might get spread out longer, but just to give you an idea of some of the things I do regularly, I might have a one-on-one with a staff attorney about their professional development, review a brief from opposing counsel in a case, and review our draft response brief. I might meet with pro bono counsel. For example, we are represented by pro bono counsel in some litigation that is in settlement negotiations. So I might meet with them to look over the latest settlement offer and draft our counter proposals. I might have a call with a law school clinic, including the clinic at Harvard. We have been very fortunate that law school clinics have taken up several projects for us. And sometimes I will talk with the clinic director or with the clinic students about maybe the focus of the project or what they've found so far. I might review social media posts for the week to make sure, again, that they get the law right and there's nothing misleading. After we do an undercover investigation, we release our findings to the public. So that involves a video, a press release, a web page, and again, I will review all of those things. I might assign research projects to a volunteer attorney, for example. We often are looking for new causes of action. So there just aren't a lot of laws that protect farmed animals. Certainly at the federal level, there aren't. And at the state level, sometimes there is a preemption argument that could be made against a state law that tries to grant farmed animals more protections than, or different protections than a federal law does. And at the state level, there are also anti-cruelty statutes, which people tend to think don't cover farmed animals. And we'll talk about that more too. The result is that we're always looking around for causes of action and statutes that were not created with animals in mind. Their purpose was not necessarily to protect animals, but if we're creative, we can find a way to use them that way. One example is a False Claims Act that we brought against Superior. It was a lamb slaughterhouse, and we did an undercover investigation there. It was very disturbing, and we found a lot of legal violations. And Superior had contracts with the US government and supplied meat to them that was represented to comply with federal food safety regulations when we had evidence showing that it didn't. And also it was represented to be halal. Superior claimed that the lambs were slaughtered in compliance with halal requirements. And when you watch the video, that's not true. So we brought a False Claims Act case, and the Department of Justice intervened, and it resulted in a settlement and a consent decree. So it was, I think that was the second time that the False Claims Act has been used to, through the federal government's contracting system as a backdoor to protect animals, at least to the extent that existing laws protect them. So that's one example of a cause of action that we found a way to use for animals. And back to my typical week, I might follow up on a FOIA request. So for those of you who aren't familiar, FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act. It's a federal statute that allows you to ask the government for public records. And we use it a lot. There are state analogs as well, which we also use at the state level. And there's a deadline, like a timeline in which the government agency that you have asked to supply records, they have to respond. And there are some agencies that just routinely do not respond in a timely way. So making FOIA requests tends to mean you're going to have to follow up on your FOIA requests, sometimes over and over. It's worth it though, because we have gotten material that way that has been the basis for legal actions, for press events, some very revealing stuff. So I thought I would talk about a few of our cases, what's on our docket right now. And the first one is Martin Farms, which is based on another undercover investigation that we did. Martin Farms is a dairy farm in Pennsylvania. And we found some really disturbing treatment of cows there. So what I'd like to do is show you our investigation video and just trigger warning. There's some upsetting stuff in here.
In this undercover video, our investigator brings you behind the closed doors of the dairy industry. Some cruelty documented here at Martin Farms is unlike anything we've ever seen. At the same time, this video also shows what life is like for cows on a typical dairy factory farm. Our investigator followed a truck from Martin Farms straight to an ice cream plant operated by Nestle, the world's largest dairy company. Nestle churns this cruelly sourced milk into ice cream brands like Dreyer's, Häagen-Dazs, and Edie's. Though the dairy industry wants you to believe in its happy cow fairy tale, the hard-to-swallow truth is there's cruelty in every drop of milk. Like all mammals, in order to produce milk, a cow must have recently given birth. Shortly after a calf is born, he is separated from his mother. The milk meant for him is instead taken away and sold to humans. Here, mother and calf touch for the last time. She lovingly licks her calf through the bars before he's taken away forever. Calves at this facility, and at 94% of dairies in the US, endure hot irons burn into their flesh and bone to permanently destroy horns and growth tissue. Here, calves are tied up as the red-hot iron is pressed down on the sensitive nerves in their heads. This lasts for several agonizing minutes, all without any pain relief. Veterinary expert Dr. Holly Cheever said, "I find this footage the most disturbing, not only due to the extreme pain that these calves experience as part of their skull is burned away, but also because it is a glaring example of dairy mismanagement that results in cruelty. The calves are in agonizing pain, shown by their violent thrashing and bellowing. Even worse, this barbaric practice is completely unnecessary. The dairy industry could simply choose to breed cows who genetically do not grow horns." Dairy cows suffer an exhausting, continuous cycle of milking and reimpregnation that completely destroys their bodies, cutting short their natural lifespan of about 20 years to around 5 when they're sent to be slaughtered. When they're no longer able to produce enough milk, they're shipped to slaughter and sold as low-grade beef, like fast food hamburgers and pet food. At Martin Farms, even the journey down the chute to be milked is excruciating. Cows are sprayed in their faces with scalding hot water, forced to move faster. But not all cows even make it to the slaughterhouse. Some become too sick or weak to walk or even stand. These poor animals are often brutally killed. Here, the farm manager shoots a cow in the head, but she remains conscious and suffers for almost a minute before he finally delivers the fatal shot. After enduring immense abuse, 2 other cows are shot in the dirt and butchered. Their meat is then distributed to employees in garbage bags. Workers hit sick and injured animals to force them to stand or walk. Other cows, like this one, are even violently pushed by tractors. Here, a device called a hip lock is used to suspend and drag this cow from a tractor. As is often the case in the dairy industry, sick cows are denied veterinary care. Cows on this farm survived weeks with untreated uterine prolapses and open sores, left to suffer or die in their own filth. This chained cow is fully conscious as the farm manager sadistically stabs her with a sharp instrument in a botched attempt to treat a supposed stomach ailment. Bleeding heavily from this torture, she receives no pain relief or veterinary care. Here, the manager uses a dirty knife to slice open an infected, pus-filled boil from a cow's face. a manager, cut off this cow's teat and left her bleeding with an open wound as she was being milked. This cow's hooves bleed as they are carelessly trimmed. Life for a dairy cow on a factory farm is a hell from which the only escape is death. If watching this is motivating you to stand up for these animals, the good news is each of us can help. This cruelty will stop when consumers refuse to buy cow's milk. Together, we can change the fate of animals like this innocent calf and break the cycle of abuse. Start today by voting with your dollar. Today's plant milk options are endless. Choose kindness.
So that was Martin Farms in Pennsylvania. And at the end of that release video, you saw part of our vegan outreach, the demand side of the market work, where we empower individuals to choose vegan. After that investigation, we took our evidence to the district attorney and asked for prosecution for violation of the anti-cruelty statute. And the district attorney took over a year before they finally said no. In Pennsylvania, you can bring a private criminal complaint to a DA and request enforcement. So we did that. And again, the DA said no. In Pennsylvania, once you submit that private criminal complaint, if the DA refuses to prosecute, you can take the DA to court and ask the judge to order the DA to prosecute. So we did that. And the judge said no. So we decided to appeal. And the appellate court came out with a fantastic opinion just in February, saying that the DA has to prosecute. And the appellate court went through our evidence, which the lower court had largely ignored. The appellate court said that the DA's legal approach was absurd, which, you know, is always fun. And the appellate court's opinion, it was something like 25 pages long. It affirmed a legal interpretation that we have been repeating for a long time, which is that anti-cruelty statutes should be applied to farmed animals, even when those statutes have what's called an agricultural exemption. So a lot of states, not all, but a lot of states in their anti-cruelty statutes include an exemption for something like standard agricultural practices or routine husbandry techniques, or the language differs from state to state. And the DA in the Martin Farms case, one of their arguments for not prosecuting was that they thought that the violations that we had brought to their, well, we thought they were violations that we brought to their attention weren't violations because they fell into the agricultural exemption. And our argument was that the type of things that you just saw in that video are not accepted standard husbandry techniques. They're cruelty. And the Court of Appeals agreed. So that was a very important moment for us and for Pennsylvania law. It's an opinion that I hope we will be able to rely on in the future to point to other state courts and say, or state district attorneys and say, your anti-cruelty statute should be protecting farmed animals from cruelty. So that was the attempt to get the law enforced against Martin Farms. That was our litigation. The next case that I'd like to talk about involves aquaculture. And again, it started with an undercover investigation. And this is the last video I'm going to show you. But since people don't know a lot about aquaculture, I think it's important to see.
Overfishing is destroying ecosystems and depleting our oceans. But is factory farming of fish really a good alternative?
Fungus ate away his face.
This compassion over killing investigation is the first of its kind, bringing you inside the cruel and unnatural world of salmon aquaculture. Every year, hundreds of millions of fish are raised in these filthy underwater cages.
Hopefully by Monday morning, all the fish aren't dead again.
He won't make it. No, he's gonna just suffer until he's fucking dead.
Fish are sensitive, intelligent animals. Many use tools and even recognize themselves in mirrors. Their pain sensors are remarkably similar to ours. In fact, our ability to feel pain is likely derived from one of our fish-like ancestors. As fish scientist Becca Franks has concluded, the science on fish sentience is clear. Fish have the capacity to suffer and feel pain. This facility is owned by Cook Aquaculture, whose subsidiary, True North, has partnered with Martha Stewart for its seafood brand. This single hatchery raises millions of salmon every year. Thousands of tiny eggs are put into large metal tanks. Some babies will hatch with extreme deformities.
Spinal deformity. Happens when they're babies and people them right now. If you're too rough with them, you break their back and they'll grow back up.
Others will succumb to fungal infections. Those who survive to adolescence endure an unnatural life, subject to cruelty and unimaginable pain. Conditions are so filthy that fish are vaccinated to prevent the spread of disease, but the salmon are not properly anesthetized first. They thrash around as the workers try to inject them with needles.
Once the needle's in them and they walk, that tears the fucking huge hole.
The vaccinate stresses them, takes its toll on some of them die off. So once you vaccinate them, it takes them like a week before they start eating again.
Workers will also cut off parts of the salmon's sensitive fins as a way to identify them. On farms like this one, fish who are deemed no longer profitable are thrown away like trash, tossed in buckets. They're left to slowly suffocate or are crushed to death by other fish.
They just suffocate. This too. It's so rough. Over the years, you kind of get desensitized.
In just a single day, COK documented hundreds of fish being thrown during the sorting process. Imagine if this was any other animal, a chicken or a dog. From the moment they're hatched, these sentient animals are routinely treated like inanimate objects.
Grab the tail and fucking squeeze.
Overcrowded and underfed, the salmon's short lives are filled with suffering.
If the fish aren't fed enough, they'll actually think the little pupil of the other fish is food, and they'll come after it and they'll peck the eye out. If you happen to see some missing eyeballs, that's the reason.
Salmon die at this facility at extremely high numbers. The dirty living conditions create the perfect environment for fungus and parasites, which grow in clumps on eggs and fish. Here, fungus is eating away at the faces of these fish.
They get like lesions and stuff from the fungus that kind of eats away at them, and then they start bleeding from that.
The fish who survive these putrid and unnatural conditions are then transported to another location where they will finish growing to be slaughtered for human consumption. This is, unfortunately, the painful reality of farming fish for food. Aquaculture is yet another cruel and exploitative factory farming system. It is not a solution to the overfishing of our oceans. The best way we can protect these animals and our planet is to leave fish off our plates.
That was the first undercover investigation of a US salmon hatchery. We're still learning about the aquaculture industry, and often people don't think about aquaculture when they think about farmed animals and how they're treated. For example, you'll often hear that about 10 billion animals are killed in the US every year for food, and 9 billion of them are chickens. Those 10 billion, that only accounts for the land animals. For aquatic animals, it's probably more. It's probably a lot more, but we don't have those figures because the industry measures fish and their products by the ton, not by individual. That's how the industry views fish and other aquatic animals, solely by their weight. So we don't have precise numbers on how many fish are killed for food, including how many are killed through aquaculture and how many are fished from the wild or caught from the wild. After this investigation, we took two different paths of action. And the first one was to try to get local officials in Maine to enforce the anti-cruelty laws against cook aquaculture, because again, we believe that what was seen in that video, as well as other evidence that we collected, showed violations of the state's anti-cruelty law. And Maine's response was essentially that there was no agency within the state government that was accountable for enforcing their anti-cruelty statute against aquaculture facilities. And in particular, it wasn't just enforcement generally. There was an anti-cruelty statute that called on agencies to adopt best management practices for agriculture, for animal agriculture, animal farming. And then an industry or a farm that was in compliance with those best management practices could use that compliance as an affirmative defense if they were charged with violating an animal cruelty law. So there were no best management practices in Maine for aquaculture, and Maine is home to about 200 aquaculture facilities. So that is a lot of fish being farmed without legal protections. So we continued trying to get the government to enforce the anti-cruelty law, and the best that we could do in the end was that the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry, I think that's the name, has an animal welfare program in Maine, and the animal welfare program sent somebody to investigate Cook. And they concluded that yes, there was a lot going on there that was improper, but they approved of Cook's handling of human resources issues and its plans to train employees differently and make some other changes. And the human resources issues, that's a continuing trope that we see in response to our undercover investigations. When we release the investigation, whether it's to the public or to law enforcement, The facility management or owners will say, we're horrified. We had no idea. We care so much about the welfare of animals. This was the work of a few bad apples, and we have fired them. So smooth sailing ahead. That is essentially the template for the talk that the company representative gives to the public or to law enforcement. That happened in Martin Farms. It happened in Cook as well. And that narrative is extremely misleading. It is meant to distract people, law enforcement and the press, from looking at the actual causes of animal cruelty and animal agriculture. Those causes are systemic, and they are all in service of maximizing profit. So the companies that own these facilities, and the people who own these facilities in some cases, their primary interest is to maximize their profit, and they put procedures, equipment, management in place in their facilities with that in mind. So when people are routinely violating animal cruelty laws in a facility, and often doing it because they haven't been trained better or because they've been trained to do exactly that, it's not a problem of a few bad apples. So the fact that the state of Maine was happy with Cook's human resources response was underwhelming. It also ignored the violations that had happened and that we had recorded and presented evidence of. The government said Cook is going to change going forward, and that's good enough for us. When a law has been broken or a crime has been committed, there's a penalty. Even if the person swears that they are going to clean up their act, even if they do, there is still a penalty for what happened. And that penalty is very rarely actually enforced on behalf of farmed animals. So we actually were able to take another step in terms of law enforcement in Maine, because Maine has a provision that says that if you can get the signatures of 150 Maine residents on a petition, you can submit that petition to a state agency, and it will require them to initiate a rulemaking procedure. So we've written a petition. We are collecting signatures to submit to the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. And it calls on them to initiate a rulemaking procedure to adopt best management practices for aquaculture facilities. And we think that that could be an important step towards legal enforcement and oversight of those 200 aquaculture facilities in Maine. We also, I mentioned that we followed two paths with Cook. The second one was litigation. We, represented by Richmond Law and Policy, we filed a consumer protection, false advertising type of litigation in DC, and argued that Cook makes claims that it has optimal animal welfare standards, that its processes and products are sustainable environmentally. So we sued, saying that some of those claims are false, and that's a violation of DC's consumer protection law. So that litigation is pending right now. The next case that I'd like to talk about here is the 28-hour law. It's not a case so much as a very recent undercover investigation. The 28-hour law is a federal law that says you can cram animals into a truck and drive them around for 28 hours without giving them food, water, rest, air, or the chance to move. But if you've done that for 28 hours, then you need to stop, let them out, let them rest, give them food and water, and not put them back on the truck for 5 hours. So it's not much of a law, but it's what we have. It's a federal statute that is meant to some extent, protect animal welfare. We believe at Animal Outlook that the 28-hour law is not enforced and is systematically and routinely violated. In 2005 and again in 2012, we conducted undercover investigations where we found that violations of the 28-hour law were rampant, that truck drivers didn't know the law existed or were wrong about what they thought the law said, and were open about the fact that they weren't in compliance with it. So in 2021, we sent investigators out again, and they followed a truck for over 32 hours from Nebraska to California. It was hauling pigs, and in those 32 hours, the investigators saw no evidence that the pigs were ever let off the truck, that the pigs were given food. In fact, the investigators recorded audio of the pigs screaming in the truck when the truck was parked for 10 hours overnight, and presumably the driver was resting, and the animals received no relief from their conditions. The conditions in this kind of interstate transport can be harsh. So, as I've said, the animals are often crowded together. There is often no room to lay down, to rest. And animals like pigs and cows, they are not meant to stand up for more than 24 hours in a row. They need to lay down and rest. They often can't do that. And if they can, they are laying in all of the waste that any animal has eliminated in that truck for the whole trip. So the floors get very slippery. Sometimes animals fall down or lay down and can't get up again. Other animals might step on them or kick them because they're on the floor and they're all crowded together. And on top of that, no food, no water, no temperature control. They are in a metal trailer. If it's moving, they can get a little bit of ventilation going through the holes in the side of the trailer. If they're not moving, they won't be getting any air at all. It'll be like when a dog is closed up in a car with a window cracked in the summer. It's incredibly hot and incredibly dangerous. And pigs in particular are not able to thermoregulate. They can't sweat. They don't sweat. So they need shade, water, mud to keep themselves cool. And in a truck, they don't have that. Millions of animals each year die during interstate transport in the US. And that could be transport not just to slaughter, it could be transport to a facility where they will be fed up and reach market weight. It could be transport to a breeding facility or to an auction house. There is probably millions of truckloads of animals that go interstate. And the reason for that is that that's the cheapest way to do things. So there's a bunch of different economic pressures in this agency or industry, some of which include regulation, federal regulation. If the animal companies want to sell their pigs or cows or chickens to feed humans, they have to comply with some sets of federal regulations, including some that require federal inspectors to be present at a slaughterhouse. And that means de facto, as it stands now, that there are only so many slaughterhouses. They tend to be large operations. And if you can't get your animals to one of those slaughterhouses, you probably won't be able to sell its meat for human food. So that's just one of the reasons that farmers or animal agriculture companies might ship animals interstate. Another is that it's really not that expensive. And when they do lose animals, generally that still costs them less than if they were to transport them in a humane way. So we've released this investigation. It's on our website, as are all of our investigations at animaloutlook.org. And we are calling on the Department of Justice to enforce the 28-hour law against this particular company, as well as in general. And that takes me to the last case. Bravo Packing is a small slaughterhouse in New Jersey that, this is from our website as well. They slaughter horses for food for exotic animals, often for wild cats in zoos. And they slaughter cows for dog food, raw dog food. There have been a lot of reports of animal cruelty at Bravo over the years. And there have been also a lot of reports about food safety issues. So Animal Outlook bought some of Bravo's raw dog food and sent it to a lab that found salmonella. And we submitted that evidence to the Food and Drug Administration. And that kicked off, over a couple of years, a cycle of the FDA investigating Bravo, Bravo having to recall infected food, and us conducting more tests, the FDA conducting more tests. The FDA found that that in 2 separate years, 2 different samples of Bravo's product both tested positive for the same strain of Listeria, which apparently means that this strain of Listeria was kind of like, it had started homekeeping in Bravo's slaughterhouse. It was in the facility and infecting the products that came out of it, which is just gross. So last week, I think it was last week, the FDA sued Bravo and entered a consent decree that keeps Bravo closed until they comply with all the federal food safety requirements. And if they open and they do not comply with those requirements, they will have to pay a lot of money. So the FDA issued a press release that mentioned that this whole enforcement cycle was kicked off because a nonprofit sent them the results of a test of Bravo's food, their raw food product. So that's another case where getting creative can wind up helping animals, because salmonella is not clearly an animal welfare issue, but shutting Bravo down, even for short periods, is great. Having them inspected is great. And if we're lucky, they'll be shut down for good. And we have also done an investigation at Bravo. This is, oh, I did a search for Bravo on our website, and there's a lot. We've been involved with them for a while. So we did an undercover investigation at Bravo Packing and recorded their attempts to kill a cow. They tried to stun her and failed. She remained conscious and apparently sensible to pain for minutes until they tried to stun her again. And they went through this cycle before they were finally successful in killing the cow. That's a violation of federal law, or it would be if they were killing the cow to feed to humans. Since they were killing the cow to feed to animals, it's not as clear that it's a violation of that federal statute, the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. It's still, we argue, absolutely cruel, a violation of the anti-cruelty law and of other statutes as well. So I promised you the last one was the last video. I won't show you this one. It is on our website if you are interested, and it is disturbing. So I'm just going to leave you with contact information, our website, it's animaloutlook.org. Veg Week starts on April 18th, vegweek.com. And I want to thank all of you for your interest in animal law, and particularly in lawyering for farmed animals. And I am happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Piper. I would like to start by asking, what has been the most, both the most rewarding aspect of your, the work that you've done in animal law and policy, and maybe the most discouraging?
The most rewarding, I feel like every time a court agrees with us, it's hugely rewarding, which should give you some indication that we don't win all the time. The latest example of that was Martin Farms, where we won this really significant victory because one thing that we've been trying to advance is the idea that state anti-cruelty laws generally do protect farmed animals. People have the idea that they don't. And that's partly because in a lot of states, there are exemptions that are worded differently in different places, but they generally say routine practices in animal agriculture don't violate the anti-cruelty law, even if they clearly qualify as cruelty. And so in Martin Farms, we got the court to say, yeah, the anti-cruelty law should apply to these farmed animals. And sorry, Chris, what was the second part of your question?
Just what some of the most discouraging aspects are of this type of work. I think you just having to watch all those videos might be.
The videos are rough, and I'm sure you've all gotten the sense that we often don't get the outcome that we're hoping for. We seek law enforcement and usually are turned away. For example, we sought law enforcement in one state, and our lawyer went physically to hand in the papers. He was sent from one building to another, from one office to another, given such a runaround, with everybody saying they weren't responsible for enforcing anti-cruelty law against or on farmed animals. And the thing is, I think that's true. I think in a lot of states, and even at the federal level, laws that are meant to protect animals are very rarely enforced on behalf of farmed animals. And so nobody even knows who's supposed to be doing that. That's discouraging.
Someone just asked actually if you can pop up your contact information again.
Oh yeah.
On your last slide. And then, so here's a question from Patrice Ellman. It says, I've been following animal advocacy for 30 years, vegetarian, vegan for over 25 years. I want to be in the trenches of changing and or enforcing animal laws. So what would you recommend the best way for someone like her at age 51 to get into animal law without a law degree?
Well, in terms of age, I would say you are not too old and it is never too late, because as I said, animal law was not my day job until about 1.5 years ago. So change is always possible. In terms of getting into animal law without a law degree, I think that there is a lot of work to be done that is sort of in the paralegal category. It doesn't mean that you necessarily need training. You just need to pick things up fast and be able to do thorough, careful research, writing, and problem solving. And to break into the organizations doing this work, the best way for them to get to know you is if you can volunteer. So I know that's not always possible for everybody, but these groups do not have big budgets. And so that is really the best way to get time with them. Good luck.
Great. And we've got a couple more we can squeeze in here. One, Angela asks, have you or has the animal protection community pursued enforcement of ethics rules against veterinarians?
I can't speak for the whole movement. That is not something that I have been involved with so far. The American Veterinary Medical Association is certainly an influential and interesting group. I know that there was a resolution introduced by some members of the AVMA asking the organization not to approve of ventilation shutdown. There is also work to get the AVMA to disapprove the force feeding techniques used to make foie gras. So there's work to be done there, and lawyers are certainly involved, and I am helping where I can in those efforts. I haven't targeted any specific veterinarians. Great.
And Ken Shapiro from Animal Society Institute asks, can you say a bit more about the extent of aquaculture, and does the Animal Welfare Act include fish? Which I'll let you answer.
The extent of aquaculture, it is huge and growing. So we generally say that somewhere between 9 and 10 billion animals are slaughtered every year just in the US for food. But that does not include aquatic animals. And if you add up the number of aquatic animals slaughtered every year, it is more than all those animals put together. It exceeds 10 billion. It's hard to get exact numbers because the industry tends to measure fish in particular by the ton, not by the individual. They're just faceless widgets to this industry that just views them as weight. So the industry is growing by leaps and bounds. It's making arguments that it's better for your health, better for the environment, a whole lot of questionable claims. And does the Animal Welfare Act apply? The Animal Welfare Act does not apply to agriculture in general. So for those who don't know, the Animal Welfare Act is sort of like a federal anti-cruelty statute, except it's way narrower, partly because the USDA has interpreted it to be very, very narrow. So it does not apply in this situation. Thanks for the question.
Great. And we'll just do one final question here, kind of linking back to the Martin case. Angie Vega asks, how do you get the attention of prosecutors to take on a case when they don't usually see animals as a priority?
It's a good question. If you have any suggestions, I'm open. More seriously, what we actually do is we identify every potential involved person in the police department, in the prosecutor's department, in the regulating agency. We go everywhere and we submit complaints and we submit our evidence, and then we keep following up when we don't hear back. And sometimes we find somebody in that chain who is sympathetic and who goes out of their way to try to make something happen. And sometimes we find a legal procedure like in Pennsylvania, where we can actually go to court and get a fair hearing before judges. So there are many different techniques, and the most important thing is persistence.
Great. Well, that wraps up the time that we have. And so thank you so much, Piper, for coming back and sharing your experiences with us. I'm sure it's very motivating for our students and others out there who are eager to engage in this work and join the field. So again, thank you so much. And reminder to the audience to please tune in for the rest of our Animal Law Week events. They're happening Thursday, Friday, Monday, and Tuesday. And we've got a great slate of speakers on a wide range of topics. So please join us for the rest of those. So thank you again, Piper.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening.